Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and produced by Cowboy Spirit Radio Network. Buffalo Bill lived a big life. He attained international fame as a showman and rubbed elbows with dignitaries of all kinds. He even visited the Eiffel Tower with Thomas Edison during the 1889 World's Fair. What's not well known is Buffalo Bill left a culinary legacy. Here to talk about what it was like to wine and dine with a famous Westerner is expert Steve Friesen, author of the new book, Galloping Gourmet, Eating and Drinking with Buffalo Bill.
Alan, it's a really, May's my favorite month. I love the weather. Not everybody does, but I do. And the desert is just blooming, right? It's beautiful.
You could be speaking for me because I would be saying the same thing.
Really?
Russell. Yeah. Well, on the way in, about half the ocotillas are fully formed, and about half are still, forming the blooms, and it's fun to see.
Yeah, my mother's favorite contrasts were the ocatilla against the red ocatilla, for those who don't know, against the yellow palo verdes. And then you throw in the lavender of the ironwoods, and it's a beautiful time. But let's get on topic. I've kind of diverted. You ever gone up to the Buffalo Bill Museum in Golden, Colorado?
It's on my list, but no, I've not put foot inside that.
No, me either. I've been to the Cody Museum in Cody, Wyoming, because we spend some time in Cody, but I've got to get up to Golden. It's interesting. Buffalo Bill, I do certain things at our rodeo, and one of the things I've done sometimes is I'll say, to make a point, I'll say, who has never heard of Buffalo Bill? He's been dead over 100 years. And rarely an 8-year-old will raise their hand, but almost nobody raises their hand they've never heard of Buffalo Bill. That's what a giant legend he is. And we've got an expert on him today. Steve Friesen is the retired director of the Buffalo Bill Museum and grave, because that's where they buried him, not Cody, Wyoming, by the way. And that's in Golden, Colorado. He's a contributing editor of True West magazine, our favorite magazine. He's the author of Lakota Performers in Europe, Their Culture and the Artifacts They Left Behind. And that's something to investigate before you head to Europe. Buffalo Bill, Scout, Showman, Visionary. His new book is Galloping Gourmet, Eating and Drinking with Buffalo Bill. It has a great picture of Buffalo Bill at a big banquet. And that's a Colorado Book Award history finalist. And Steve is joining us from Denver, Colorado, the place I was born and moved away from to hit Arizona. So anyway, this is a side of Buffalo Bill I don't think I've ever heard about. What got you interested in the Galloping Gourmet?
Well, it was a side that initially I'd never heard of or was not aware of, but I'm kind of a foodie, and I was talking with a friend of mine who knew a guy named Gustavo Arellano, who actually wrote a book called Taco USA. It's about the history of Mexican food in America. And he told me that Buffalo Bill had opened the first Mexican restaurant east of the Mississippi. And I was like, I've never heard of that. Well, he sent me the information about it, and indeed he did. In 1886, while his Wild West show was performing at Madison Square Garden, he opened a Mexican restaurant, and thus was the first to introduce New York City to Mexican food, as well as everybody east of the Mississippi, I guess you could say. And that got me thinking, what else did he do with food? And the more I looked, the more I realized not only were people talking about the kind of food that he served his people, all the places they ate, the banquets he attended, but also in his autobiographies, he would make a point of mentioning some of the entrees that he ate. And I was like, well, wait a minute, let's start researching that. I started doing research, and I came up with almost 2,000 notes, so I figured, well, there's more than enough for a book there. And in fact, I had to cut some things back even because I had so much information. So
that's pretty a lot to get your arms around. What somebody spent their life eating.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, any idea why Buffalo Bill chose to bring Mexican food to the East? Mexican food as opposed to something else. Was it a love of his?
Well, I think it was an opportunity. The first group of people, now 1886 is only 3 years after he started the show. So he still has a relatively small cast, and it consists of cowgirls, cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, and of course, Indians, primarily Lakota Indians, and a few other people. I think he had a Buffalo soldier, in fact, on the staff by then. But he had these vaqueros who were part of it, and their wives opened this Mexican restaurant, or they did the cooking for this Mexican restaurant. I think it was Buffalo Bill was always trying new things. He was very much of an opportunist, taking advantage of opportunities, and he saw this as a possible opportunity, and so they opened it up, and it I don't know it went over very well because he didn't try it ever again after that, after New York. There's a lot of things people try in New York and never try again later on. But he, at the time, there was a fair amount of writing about it in some of the local papers, and they completely misunderstood the food, as you can imagine. They referred to the enchiladas as hen-chiladas and said they were like a French crepe, but a little spicy, so it was kind of an interesting reception. But more importantly, I think it was opportunity to see the man, Buffalo Bill, and his interest in food and in promoting and trying different foods. And there's more I can tell you about even what he did in Europe, but let's see if you have other questions first.
Well, let's hear about Europe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when he went to Europe, he introduced several things. When he arrives, this is 1887. This is a year after he opens this rather short-lived restaurant in New York City. So 1887, he's in London as part of a special American exhibition there as part of Queen Victoria's golden anniversary as being the Queen of England. At any rate, at the show, they decided to open a 700-foot-long bar, sort of wraps around the entire scaffolding that where all the seating was for the show. 700 feet, and they served 400 different cocktails. They were they were specifically promoting American cocktails, which themselves weren't all that new. American cocktails really had been kind of 1840s to 60s is when they were sort of becoming perfected, if you will. But this was a completely new thing to the Brits because the American cocktails they were using, of which we're all acquainted here still, were drinks that used ice. So they weren't just wine or champagne or whiskey or something like that. They were actually mixed drinks for which ice was a vital component. Now, this use of ice in drinks was something with which the British were unacquainted. And this kind of introduced it. As a result, there were openings of American bars in various restaurants and hotels not long after Buffalo Bill had his show there. And in fact, the longest running American bar is still at the Savoy Hotel in London. It's still operating, and it was started back around that time. And you can go, and there are more places now you can get ice with your drinks in England, but that's one where you can go and you can be assured if you want an American cocktail, you'll be able to get it.
That's not the 700-foot-long bar.
No, it isn't quite that long. There's a 700-foot-long, perhaps, street in front of the Savoy, where it's the only place in England where you drive on the right side of the road.
Interesting.
So they really adopted the American way there, I guess.
Well, I wonder how many accidents they get.
Yeah.
So let's back up for a sec.
Sure.
My understanding, I'm kind of a fan of Buffalo Bill. I have one of the original posters from early 1900s sitting in the middle of my family room, and And I just, he's just uniquely American and a giant figure really in the West, obviously. But the way I understand it, and, been to the Cody Museum, etc., he really did all these things. Medal of Honor winner, took it away, gave it back, the whole thing. But he started with theater shows with people like Wild Bill and some Indians and notable folks. And then he'd go back to the West, do what he was doing. And then from that grew the show. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a great capsule. He did start out on stage doing plays, kind of like melodramas, really. If you were looking for any truth in them, there wouldn't be a whole lot except for the characters themselves, like Buffalo Bill and his friend Texas Jack were real scouts on the prairie, for example. Right. But otherwise, they were rather exaggerated. But at any rate, that happens for about 10 years, and then Buffalo Bill decides, you can't show the West on a stage. You've got to find a way to show the animals, the peoples, and so he created in 1883 this large arena show with all of the animals, wagons, and the peoples of the West. And that show started out maybe with a few hundred initially, and by the time Buffalo Bill's Wild West closed in 1913, there were over 1,600 people working at the show. Not only all the performers, but all the people who had to do everything for them, including a huge staff of cooks and waiters who provided food for everybody who worked there.
Sounds like it might have died due to its own weight.
Well, it was a very expensive operation, and Buffalo Bill made the mistake of borrowing money from Harry Tamman, who really wanted to have him be part of his Salsloto circus. And Buffalo Bill didn't get the loan paid off quite soon enough, and Tamman had the show seized and then sold at auction. Here in Denver, actually.
I did not know that. And that was who? Harry Tamman?
Harry. Harry Tamman was one of the owners of the Denver Post, to put that within context. He was kind of a slippery fellow, and obviously Buffalo Bill, while he was a great entrepreneur, wasn't as good of a business manager perhaps as he should have been. And he signed this note to pay Harry back within a month and a half of starting the show, and he didn't have quite enough money because the show started in April, and by June he was supposed to pay it back, and he didn't because he didn't have enough money accumulated. So the other mistake that they made was coming to Denver with the show, and that's when the sheriff seized the show and sold it at auction. There were some real missteps on that. 1913 was not one of Buffalo Bill's better years.
So, am I right? He died in 1917?
Yeah, that wasn't a good year for him either, I guess.
No, I don't guess. Yeah. So I'm just trying to place. So he had 4 more years.
Sure.
Kind of give us a summary of, once he went to the arena and the big show that started with a few hundred, ended with 1,600. What was he doing in the show? What was, in which he didn't allow anybody called the show. He was bringing the Wild West to them, right?
Right. In fact, that was a point. He considered it an educational, yes, entertainment, but educational, not a show like some of these medicine shows and things were running around at the time. But you would see the people from the West showing life on the West. These were not actors per se. They were the real thing. So real Mexican vaqueros, real Lakota who he recruited. In fact, some people that had been sort of his enemies among the Lakota while he was scouting became his friends. And they found the performance in the Wild West a way to get off the reservation and enjoy some of the life they had before, wandering about and showing their bravery, etc. So he would recreate aspects of the Wild West. He even for a while showed the battle at Little Bighorn. And then he also showed the skills. He would have a Pony Express ride. He would show something they called Cowboy Fun, or Cowboy Frolics, which ended up being kind of laying the groundwork, if you will, for the rodeo that you guys were talking about a little earlier. The rodeo today has a lot to owe to Buffalo Bill for the way it is worked out. So you'd see all this. And, of course, one can't forget Annie Oakley, who would do the sharpshooting and was better than any man at that.
And that's for real. That isn't just people talking.
That's for real.
And
you read the newspaper articles and things, and you'll find actually there were competitions. They would shoot in competitions and things like that, and she would win.
So Buffalo Bill's show, which he'd be offended if we said that, and I'll tell a quick story. I read an article one time, there was a rifle came up for sale, and it was from the era of Buffalo Bill, and it was touted. They were trying to sell it for a lot of money because it was Buffalo Bill's, and from the show, and it said Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show, and it was immediately dismissed as a fraud because the word show appeared, and he hated that word. But wouldn't allow it used. It was always Buffalo Bill's Wild West. So 101 Ranch, they had their own show. I think ended up second biggest. I think it was Roy Rogers had a show, maybe Autry. There were several other shows that tried to do similar things. Is that accurate?
Yes, in fact, yeah. After he started his, there were a number of shows that started, and many of the names you might not even have heard of because they were not very successful. But the 101 Ranch was one of the most successful. Pawnee Bill, who started with Buffalo Bill and had his own show, was successful as well. And in fact, the two of them combined forces in around 1909 and had a joint show. But then you have people that were movie stars. Tom Mix was another person who had briefly had a show. So they were copying. And in fact, people like Tom Mix consider Buffalo Bill to be kind of an idol. They wanted to do a show just like their idol Buffalo Bill had done. And that gave them, in their mind, a little legitimacy in addition to being movie stars.
Well, on that, we'll take a quick break, and I think they were on target. He was somebody worth idolizing.
Today's episode is brought to you in part by the Dude Ranchers Association. Since 1926, the Dude Ranchers Association has been providing the original Western adventure vacation. Whether you're 5 years old, 85, or any age in between, you'll find a Dude Ranch activity just for you. You can be horseback on trails, hike them by foot, or ride ATVs, e-bikes, mountain bikes. And then there's archery, shooting, and if you're near a river, rafting. Or join an art class or lecture, schedule a massage. Hospitality is always top-notch with fantastic meals including breakfasts out on the range and evening campfires and sing-alongs. Summer vacations, fall breaks, holiday getaways, Dude Ranches are perfect for all. Visit duderanch.org to learn more about the over 90 member ranches and find the perfect ranch for your next vacation. That's duderanch.org or give them a call. Adventure awaits. Come find your inner cowboy today.
You know, you talk a bit in your book about the legacy of Buffalo Bill's food, and what is that?
Well, one of the things that I've discovered on trips to Europe is things are still being served there that go back to the time of Buffalo Bill. Cornbread, you will still find it. And Buffalo Bill was one of the first to actually serve cornbread to people in Europe. For a number of years, there was a Wild West show that was performed at Disneyland Paris. During COVID, it closed and it hasn't reopened. But they would specialize in American foods. And that was exactly what Buffalo Bill tried to do in Europe, was to introduce American foods to the continent. Here in the U.S., for example, we have the Buckhorn Exchange here in Denver, the Fort Restaurant in Denver, where they're continuing to serve wild game meat. And the Buckhorn in particular was a place where Buffalo Bill would often visit when he was in Denver. So that's still around.
You mean the actual same restaurant was then?
Yes, it was opened in 1893. It's our oldest restaurant in Denver.
And so that's called the Buckhorn?
The Buckhorn Exchange.
Buckhorn Exchange. Man, we got to put a shout out to them. They've been there since 1893. That's amazing.
We need to leave our tracks in there.
Yeah.
In their front
there
door.
You go. You come on up to see the museum in Golden and stop in at the Buckhorn, and I'll join you for a couple of drinks.
Well,
that's a great offer.
We're buying.
Yeah.
We're gonna do that. Buffalo Bill was interested also. It's not just cornbread, some gourmet food. Is that true?
Oh yes. He and for example, one of his early introductions was when he was on the plains. This is before he even started his shows. He was on the plains hunting, and he led a group of people from New York City on a hunt, and they brought along their chefs, and they had several wagon loads of supplies that they brought, all to be served with the wild game. So one of the things they served at the time was buffalo steaks with mushrooms. Well, Buffalo Bill had never eaten it that way, and he found that was really tasty. They brought along champagne and other things. So he's getting a taste, even while he's scouting and hunting buffalo for good foods. When he finally goes back east in 1872, he dines frequently at Delmonico's and a number of other places like that, and really discovers a taste for that. Now, the thing is, when he starts his Wild West show and he's feeding those as many as 1,600 people, he makes sure they eat as well as he ate. And at the time, they will actually say people who work for Buffalo Bill and eat in his food tent, they dine as well as anybody in the finest restaurants as in New York or Boston. So when the Prince of Wales came by to eat with Buffalo Bill when it was in that his show was in London, he served them chicken Maryland style. And that chicken Maryland style was so tasty to the prince that he asked for the recipe so that he could take it back and have his cooks prepare it for him as well.
If they're feeding that many people, it had to topple with its own weight. You know, how do you keep feeding that many people on a regular basis?
He had something. Well, first off, they had a half acre where they did all the food prep with massive barrels, acted as stew pots for the soups. They'd heat up the water for the coffee and the tea. But the big thing that they had was a range wagon, and they would arrange. It was a wagon about 20 feet long, and it had basically 8 kitchen ranges on this 20-foot wagon. And these would be going all at one time with a giant smokestack in the middle, and newspaper writers would say, this thing is like Vesuvius. It is belching forth fire and tasty food. And they would have 8 cooks cooking around there and getting the food prepped. And then they had waiters. The waiters would actually go to the tables, ask the employees, what do you want to eat? And they would go get it. They'd bring it back in. And if they wanted to eat steak for breakfast, they could have it. Steak for lunch, they could have it. Steak for dinner, they could have it. All sorts of other delicacies were provided, particularly at the times when they had 4th of July. And that photograph that you mentioned on the front of the book, that was taken at one of their 4th of July celebrations. And that was when they really sort of put on the fancy experience and all of that. But every day they ate with tablecloths, cloth napkins, china for the most part, and excellent food.
How do you get that many people together on a regular basis? You know, where you're limited to mostly just the big cities, aren't you?
Well, they what was most important was to have a city that had, or a town that had a railroad station, because everything was by rails then, both to bring in the show, which took 3 trains to do it, 3 different separate train sections, but also they could bring in fresh meats very quickly from places like Chicago. But before they got to a town, they had people were going ahead and were ordering all those foods so that they would have plenty of food. Excuse me just a minute, I have to cough. It's spring allergies. At any rate, so people would observe there's about 2,000 pounds of steak and other cuts of beef in the corner there. And that was the meat that they might have for only a day or two. They would have so many large amounts of meat, breads, almost wagon loads of bread that we brought into the show. So they would work with local suppliers as much as possible, and I deal with that in one of the chapters of my books.
Yeah, you even have a picture of that range wagon here, and if they were feeding 1,600 people out of there, we need to go back to school. Yeah, we need to go back to school.
We need to learn what they were doing.
Buffalo.
Well, the chicken Maryland style, for example, you could put in large trays and bake them in the ovens, and then you'd have your sauces prepared separately. Mm-hmm. And you prepare the chicken, and then you pour the sauce over it and have it taken out that way. Steaks actually are not difficult to do in great quantities. Those are maybe some of the easier items to prepare, actually. Right. Nowadays, you put a good rub on a steak and send it out. Nice salt and pepper, and
depends on how picky people are about how they're cooked. But you have 1,600, you'll get one right for somebody. So Buffalo Bill would kind of digress back to, how do you get his name? Is it the obvious or?
Well, yes, he was a very good hunter. He got that nickname while he was hunting buffalo for the railroad. And he was, unlike some of the other hunters, and certainly later when you have the hide hunters do it, they were sitting on a hill a long way and using a long-distance rifle and killing him from so far away. But Buffalo Bill would ride up right close to the buffalo. He had a good buffalo hunting horse with him. And he would ride up behind him and shoot him right behind the rib cage into the lungs. And so he was very good at that. And he was not only so good, but provide so much buffalo meat for the railroad workers, and that was what he was hired to do, that they started calling him Buffalo Bill as a nickname.
And so, we've all seen the pictures of the piles of hides and the destruction, near extinction of the buffalo. That was done later. Is that what you're saying? Buffalo Bill was hunting for
yes.
food for the railroad. He didn't participate in the hide deal?
Not at all. He had nothing to do with that. That was later, and in fact, he was as disturbed by it as some of the other people were, and he spoke out against it as well. The problem was the hide hunters, they were hunting for the leather, because the leather off the buffalo was very strong, and they needed that leather to run all the belts, be the belts for all the machinery that they were using in the factories back east. So that was why there was such a demand and why it was very lucrative to be a buffalo hide hunter. But he was not one. He only hunted buffalo for the meat earlier on. He did a few celebrity hunts, but again, that was primarily for the meat. He actually, the trophies, the heads, he was working for the Union Pacific, and so those heads were often mounted and put in their railroad stations. So they didn't waste much, not like later on.
Well, I wanted to go to that. I've heard different stories about how many buffalo were out on the plains before they started that wholesale slaughter. Throw a number out there.
Oh, my. 10 million, maybe more.
Really?
There were millions. Buffalo Bill even wrote about how he was in one place once and he spent pretty much a day watching a herd of buffalo go past him.
That's amazing.
So it's like the story of the passenger pigeon. You think they're unlimited. People just kill them relentlessly without any checking of their, if you will, bloodlust, and they're gone. And I think that was what happened. And fortunately, people like Buffalo Bill spoke up in time that the last buffalo didn't disappear. And now we probably have as many buffalo in various herds in this country as we ever have had since the 1880s.
Right.
Well, we're talking about those huge numbers of buffalo and what all. What also surprised you when you were writing the book about some staggering numbers?
What surprised me about the staggering numbers with the buffalo?
No, he's asking anything else
might
have surprised you in the book.
Oh, yeah, other things that might have surprised me. Well, one of the things that it wasn't a surprise because I'd read about it, but it kind of dawned on me was, and we haven't really talked about this, the variety, the diversity of people who are part of the show. He started out with the vaqueros, the Lakota Indians, cowboys, cowgirls, but he kept adding and adding, so that by 1899, he had people from almost every continent in the world that were part of his show, wow, all demonstrating their horsemanship. And the best part is they all managed to get along. In fact, there are some people that said, all these different people sitting, breaking bread together, eating together is a lesson for the rest of the world on tolerance and how we can learn to live together as well.
Well, it had to topple on its own weight at some point in time because it just kept getting bigger. And would that be safe to say?
I can't necessarily agree with that because they managed it.
I read one time.
It wasn't the weight, if you will. I guess it would be the debt that it took, or the investment that it took to run an operation like that. But for most of his life, up until he made that bad decision to borrow from Harry Tamman in 1913, he was turning a profit on it. It was his bread and butter.
I read once that he was it's sort of at the height, probably when he had the 1,600 people, that he was moving more people, animals, and equipment than any country in the world, and that the Kaiser in Germany actually sent people to work on his show to gain experience in that level of logistics. Have you ever run into that?
Yes. Oh, yes. And the museum has some photographs of how they would load all the wagons and things onto the flat bed trucks or whatever you call them for the train, the flat cars for the trains. And they had it all worked out. So you would just take one after another. They were all connected with sort of wooden planks that you could just pull one wagon on after another and then do the same to unload. That was all very efficient. The cooking of the food was very efficient. He was early use. He had early use of lighting for night shows, and he knew Thomas Edison, so he acquired all those things through Thomas Edison. He was very efficient in the way he did the operation, which is why, yes, it gets big. It becomes somewhat unwieldy, but then you figure out new ways to make it work.
Well, he just needed a real good CFO, and he wouldn't have gotten in trouble, right? He was a great logistics guy, great showman, great marketer. He had everything, but maybe he needed a little help on that
he did,
debt management side.
That's right. That was his first partner, and his first business partner had Nate Salisbury. He was a very astute manager. But then Nate Salisbury died of a stomach problem in about 1903, and things started to waver after that.
Sure.
So during the real heyday, he had a lot to do with it.
So the book's great. Buffalo Bill, noted icon. No one raises their hand at our rodeo that hadn't heard of him. So the book is terrific because it looks at him from a different perspective and brings in a lot of unexpected stuff. That's what I think is so interesting about it. But the end of the book with the appendix, and you're not limiting yourself to food. You've got some cocktails in there. I saw mint julep, which of course the Kentucky Derby's famous for. You got red lemonade. You got the pretty fancy food. You got donuts. So everybody loves donuts. They just don't all admit it, right? So this is a fun book, and people. What's the story of the mint julep? Who had it first?
Well, goodness, it certainly started in the South, and people had their own ideas about what the best mint julep would be.
Yeah.
1862 is one of the first times that somebody actually wrote those down. There is a possibility that it was actually an African American mixologist that came up with it. I think it was in Kentucky, with the mint julep, which makes sense. Mint julep coming out of Kentucky.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I've been to the Derby and I buy them for the glass.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Buffalo Bill was supposed to be really good at making old fashions. That was one of his specialties, as far as people who visited him were concerned. Now, that's something just briefly to mention. Buffalo Bill spent a lot of his life not drinking any whiskey, because he had made a pledge to Nate Salisbury that he wouldn't drink during the show season, which amounted to about 7 months of every year. However, he always had liquor around so that he could be a good host and provide the hospitality to his visitors.
Interesting. Well, it's Galloping Gourmet, Steve Friesen, Eating and Drinking with Buffalo Bill. It's a great book, and I'm sure people can get it anywhere. What's next?
Yeah, that's the obvious question. What's next on your agenda?
Well, I've done 3 books associated with Buffalo Bill. Now I'm going to turn to something, as the old Monty Python thing was, now for something completely different. My next book's going to be about a Swiss folk artist who moved to Kansas in around 1890s and painted scenes of Switzerland on farmhouses in the center of Kansas.
Never heard of that.
How did you discover this subject?
Yeah, it's a different story, that's for sure. But it also gives me a chance to go to Switzerland and do more research, which I can't complain about.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, thank you. Galloping Gourmet, Steve Friesen, Eating and Drinking with Buffalo Bill. Great book. Thank you.
Where can somebody buy it?
Thank you for the compliments. I appreciate it.
Where can somebody buy your book?
Everywhere.
Where?
Yeah.
Well, it's like so many books. It's always available on Amazon. Then you can definitely order through your local bookstore. It's University of Nebraska Press, so it's very accessible.
And they do they get so many great books out there.
They do.
And if people want to sort of go backtrack into your other books, do you have a website where they can go and review, or?
They can, the Buffalo Bill Scout Showman Visionary is still in print. Unfortunately, the Lakota Performers is no longer in print. It is about as scarce as hen's teeth right now.
Oh, okay. Well, we will hope it gets reprinted. Thank you so much.
I'm hoping to, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being with us. It was really good.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Stephen. Now you know the rest of the story, and you learn more here by accident than most places by design. We are right here at the White Stallion Ranch in Tucson, Arizona, where you can have not only a rodeo and cowboy adventure, maybe you can even drop in and be a part of the program, have a radio adventure. So check us out at whitestallion.com, whitestallion.com. My name is Stan, and I'm the person who has the opportunity and the privilege to put this program together as a part of the work we do. And if you're going to say, hey, do you think perhaps I could be on the radio? Well, we might be able to help you do just that. I can tell you, Russell and Alan, after many years of riding the range, never thought they would be radio wranglers, but guess what? That's what they do, and they love it, and you might have that opportunity too. And we have started a new organization to make that possible for you. We call it the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network. The Cowboy Spirit Radio Network, and we're here to help men and women, cowboys and cowgirls who have a story to tell and perhaps some wisdom, insight, and truth to share about the Western way of life, so you can be on this worldwide radio program system. Reach out, WIT Radio, W-I-T Radio, witradio.net. Stan at witradio.net, or just simply check our web stage at witradio.net. Get in touch with us, and let's talk about making this the year that you not only ride the range, maybe you get a chance to even be on your own radio program. Maybe even own your own radio station. So give that some thought as you go about your week. And as you kind of ride along and listen to some of the things on the radio, you say, I think I could do that. And maybe you could.
You know, Alan, at the Cody Museum in Cody, Wyoming, another great museum. I want to do the Golden, Colorado one, but they had an exhibit, and it stuck with me, and I think it's one of the many reasons I think Buffalo Bill is just such a giant figure in Western American history and American history in general. They talked about when he was initially doing his shows in the theaters, which we talked about a little bit today. And they said, to put this in perspective, imagine John Wayne was doing a movie about World War II and then finishing the shoot schedule and then jumping on a boat and going to fight Germans in World War II and then coming back and doing a movie and then going back. And because that's literally what Buffalo Bill did. He would do these shows in these theaters, and then he would go back and scout for the cavalry or feed the railroad with buffalo meat, and actually won the Medal of Honor in an attack where he was a civilian scout and saved a bunch of cavalry soldiers' lives. So he's a big deal for a reason.
Yeah, huge character.
All right, fans, that's a wrap from the West. A shout out to Stan Houston and his production company. If there's a famous Westerner you'd like to learn about on this podcast, let us know. Email the cowboyuppodcast@gmail.com or connect with us through Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. We welcome suggestions. Until we meet again, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall, ride safe, and enjoy this tune, Stories That the Rocks Tell, written and performed by Mickey Furman.
I can hear my mother's voice so clear, reading by my bedside, odysseys and fairy tales, how she made them come alive. She said stories are all around, my child, that's something you've been taught well. Just go to the mountain and you will hear the stories that the rocks tell. So come on, Molly, let's go to the mountain. You can chase a rabbit or a fox there. I'll stand quiet so I can hear the stories that the rocks tell. I lay my hands on know stories and songs are kind of the same. They're just memories on a blank page. Try too hard and they'll never come. They find you in such strange ways.